How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today I've got a very special guest for you all. I last spoke to this guy back in episode 122. I'm joined by a PT with over 15 years experience and he's now a trainer of trainers. Today I'm joined by the one and only Luke Tulloch. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, mate. So you'd already done over 100 when I was on before.
Yeah.
Wow, what are you up to now?
So this will be episode 266.
Oh my god, dude, you're a machine. Holy cow. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on again. It's really good to be back on.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump back on again. And yeah, I'll always try and at least do one a week. Try and fill up my spare time. Keeps me out of trouble.
Yeah, good.
No, how are you? What's been happening in your world since we last spoke?
Yeah, mate. No, I'm good. There's been a lot of changes for me. So I've moved to Sweden, and I've had a daughter. She's a bit over a year old, so life's a little bit different now for sure. And had to change up the training and stuff like that as well. So it's been, I suppose, good just to get a bit of an insight as to what it's like for some of my clients, I guess, being new parents or having young children. So yeah, it's really good though, mate. Everything's cruising along well, and as you said, my client base has just over the years slowly evolved more and more to be mostly coaches. So I thought, well, I'll specifically say that I coach coaches now. So that's been really interesting because coaches also need coaching. Like there's just some human elements that we all have that requires a bit of coaching, and it's been really fun to be able to do that. So yeah, it's good, man.
Nice. Oh, cool. And how have you? Just touching on sort of obviously, having a daughter. How have you found, being able to manage everything from there?
Oh,
How's your sleep been with
mate,
that?
it's brutal. It's honestly, uh, to be perfectly honest, although it's very rewarding, it was the hardest year of my life. That the first year of having her. So, to be perfectly honest, because like I was in a new country as well, so it was pretty tough. But yeah, getting into more of a routine now. So we've obviously had to learn with my wife and I how to structure and manage our time between the two of us, and I feel really lucky that because I work online, like I can be around a lot for my daughter. So that's a really nice thing. I think it would be really tough having to do a 9 to 5 and then still have the energy when you come home to interact with the daughter and this kind of thing, or like one of the partners has to be at home with the baby the whole day. It would be really hard. So we're pretty lucky actually, even though it has been hard.
Yeah, nice. And how have you found? Because obviously, it's like with anything, it's a little bit like, I mean, I don't have any children, but I've had injuries, and when clients have had
Mm.
injuries, I can be like, I can 100% relate to that. Have you kind of, I don't want to use the phrase a better appreciation, but maybe a bit of more of understanding of being like, right. So actually, when I'm saying this is actually how it works.
Mate, massively, because like everybody knows that having a kid is hard, right? But I've spoken to several parents where they were like, yeah, I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't really understand exactly in what ways or how hard it can be sometimes. Like honestly, some of the lows are like really, really low, and obviously the highs are like extremely high. They're unbeatably high. But yeah, you can't really explain it until you're in the middle of it. So it is good to get the experience for sure, because obviously at some point, like most people end up choosing to have kids, and so it is good to get the insight for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that you said there, obviously, gravitated more towards, training trainers as that kind of like client base has increased. Is that something that was a natural progression? How have you found training other trainers? How has that kind of grown, if you like?
Yeah, man. Well, I've always done a bit of like courses and mentoring and doing seminars and stuff like that. So I've naturally always had some contact with trainers in like a professional setting, helping them with something or other, whether it's mostly education side of things. And I've always found it really interesting. But having them as clients, I think I mean, it's not like super different to having just regular people who are into training, I think. And it is fun though, because there's some like language and stuff that is just common. So it's easy to kind of get into the meat of like, okay, well, this is why I'm programming this way, and this is what you're going to do and stuff. And they get a lot out of that, and you don't kind of have to go through that initial phase of like, okay, well, I'm introducing you to an exercise or some terminology for the very first time. So that can be quite fun because you can kind of get to the meat of some creative programming or something straight away. But yeah, it's just kind of naturally happen. And I think it's a case of like coaches recognize the value of coaching. So in that sense, it seems quite natural actually when you think about it to get a coach yourself if you are a coach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what um I literally had a conversation about this the other day. And I actually said I have a coach, in terms of my programming, because I write programs for a living, and sometimes it's kind of like, actually you need something from there. But then equally, from a mentorship point of view, a business point of view, it's always good to have somebody there for you, because I think from a client's point of view, sometimes it's thinking that the trainers can have the answer all the time, whereas actually it's good to speak with like mind, or how I like to think of it, just a second pair of eyes to be
Yeah,
like,
man.
have you thought about doing it this way? And you kind of what's the phrase? You don't know what you don't know until
Yep.
somebody says it. Is that kind of what you found?
Yeah, massively. And I think regardless, it's difficult when you're in the middle of something to actually take a more objective viewpoint because you're involved in it, right? So even if the knowledge of your coach is the same as yours, or even maybe they know a bit less than you about a certain topic, sometimes just their perspective, as you said, maybe you're not looking at something a particular way, is so valuable to help you recognize what's going on. And, it's such a case of like with anybody, you often know what you need to do, but just having someone outside to tell you, like, yes, this is the right course of action and I'm going to support you with it, enables you to just do it, Whereas if you're by yourself, sometimes you kind of know you need to get to bed early or whatever, but you just don't really do it because there's no accountability there, or there's no one kind of agreeing with you that, like, yes, this is the lowest hanging fruit that we need to sort out. So, in many cases, that's why I say, like, it's incredible how similar it can be to just coaching someone who's not a coach but has a decent amount of fitness knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you've said there, similarities between, just a general pop person working with a coach compared to a trainer or a coach. And I think, well, it would be good to hear kind of your thoughts on it in the first kind of topic that I had in mind, if you
Mm.
like, is that sometimes when a client works with a coach, there's a pain point or a breaking point of, I actually need to reach out and get help here, and that's either sometimes something's happened, or they just feel as though they can't do it themselves. Sometimes from a Gen Pop client, that's going to be maybe confidence, but there's that phrase that gets thrown around with coaches is in imposter syndrome. And I just kind of wanted to touch on what is imposter syndrome for any coaches that might not know, what that is, or have heard of it but isn't sure, but then how that maybe relates to confidence in their own abilities, or just how they present themselves, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, imposter syndrome is essentially just feeling like you're in a position of expertise that maybe you don't quite deserve, or you're not quite good enough to match the expectations of your clients or something like that. And everybody goes through it at some point. I think sometimes we feel a bit falsely confident in situations as well, but it's really, really common that even the cream of the crop will feel imposter syndrome. And certainly when you start getting a little bit of success or a bit of reputation, then sometimes people put you on a bit of a pedestal, and you sometimes think, well, geez, I mean, certainly if, like, in my position, if you're coaching coaches, like, you have a coach coming to you and you're like, oh God, I hope I do a good job here, because they're a coach themselves, So it's really, really common to get these feelings, at least sometimes, where you kind of feel like maybe I don't know enough here. Maybe I'm not going to do the best job. So it's key to kind of understand that you don't necessarily need to know everything, and that you can put yourself in a position to help someone, even if you're not like an absolute expert. And this can come across in a variety of fields. Like, you might have a specialization as a coach, and then you might have a client who comes to you and says, you know what, I want to take up running or something. You're like, oh my God, I'm a bodybuilding coach. I don't know what to do here. But there's still ways that you can not be an imposter, and you can help this person even if you're not a running expert, for example. So again, it's common to see, and it's something that we all have to deal with at some point. So I think it's worth exploring and understanding, like, how can you overcome it, and when is it appropriate to actually feel like you need to maybe refer to someone else or something like that. But certainly it's an area that is going to happen to you at some point.
Yeah. And is that always going to I don't know what the phrase is, not flare up, but show up at different points within? Because obviously, as a beginner, you're going to be thinking, I'm literally just qualified. I've literally just learned something. Like, why are people paying me money for this? And then, obviously, as you become more experienced, there might always be that element because you gradually expand your network, client
Mm.
base, following, whatever it may be. Is there always going to be, or have you found that there's always going to be maybe a little bit in the background as you progress, or as coaches progress through their career?
Yeah, mate, I think so. And there's the classic sort of Dunning-Kruger where people feel a bit more confident about stuff that they don't really know too much about, purely because they don't know that there's this whole other world out there that they don't know anything about. So you don't know what you don't know. But I think it creeps along and it shows up sometimes because if you kind of think about it, I almost had this realization through my training, actually, through as I progressed my physique, that there's almost like different sized ponds that you end up jumping from, right? So when you're first starting out, there's kind of no real expectation. Let's use an analogy to, like, if you're training for like physique or powerlifting or something. It's like, yeah, I know I'm weak, I know I'm small. I'm not trying to compete with competitive bodybuilders or powerlifters. I'm just trying to get a bit better. And it's kind of the same at the start of your personal training career. You're just kind of trying to get a bit better and build up a client base and get some experience and this kind of thing. And then, so you feel like, okay, I know I don't know anything, but then you get a bit of experience and your client base starts growing, or maybe if we use the analogy, you get a bit stronger and you do your first competition and stuff. And now what you're comparing yourself to is people in the competition, maybe other novice powerlifters or novice bodybuilders. So you're into a bigger pond now, and you're still a small fish in this bigger pond. But eventually you outgrow that pond and then you jump to a bigger one. And so eventually what happens is, like, you're getting better, you're gaining experience as you go along. But there's always a stage where there is someone with more knowledge than you, with a bigger following, with a bigger physique, with a bigger total or whatever. And sometimes what happens is you feel like you're kind of on top of things, and then you suddenly realize, like, oh crap, there's another ladder that I need to climb up now. There's a bigger pond, and now you're in that pond. So sometimes, for example, I'll get questions on my Instagram or something like this that are like pretty complicated. And it's like, dude, I don't have a PhD in that, but you're talking to me as if I do, which is really gratifying. It's like very nice that people think I actually know something about this topic, but like I don't. And then you kind of feel like, oh crap, like, should I be actually answering this question? Like, how do I go about this? Do people think I'm more knowledgeable than I actually am? Am I kind of tricking them into that? Like, it's always going to show up at some point. So I think it kind of goes in these waves, to answer your question, where you sort of feel like you're getting on top of things, and then you might just suddenly realize, like, oh man, there's this whole area that I actually don't know anything about, or whatever. And then you kind of get a handle on something else. Hey, I did a really good job with this client, but then, oh man, this other client, like, I felt so lost and whatever. So in my experience, it does come in waves. No matter how knowledgeable you get, there's always something that you don't know, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes, because there is an element, or maybe I don't know, a myth or a thought that there can be some trainers that'll think, I know everything that I need to know about this, or they'll maybe neglect other areas. So I've been doing this for a while. I don't need to do the other thing. Is there is there pros and cons to maybe thinking that you've overcome imposter syndrome? It's not a thing anymore. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly what to do. But then equally, could it actually be a little bit? Could it be detrimental on the other side of it? Thinking, you know, actually holding coaches back from potentially reaching their full potential. I hope I'm
Yeah, yeah.
explaining that right.
No, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. Like, you do have to have some humility, right? You have to realize that you're not the best at everything. And so that can help you to actually understand, hey, where am I going to apply my skills? Where do I need to learn more? Where do I need to refer people on? This kind of thing. But I see that. And I also see there's a problem with that sometimes as well, where people are just unsure of taking a stance on something and having an opinion. I think that sometimes we are told that the best answers in a lot of situations are, oh, maybe, and it depends. And that's certainly true. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with having an opinion on something and then
Mm.
changing your mind on it later. I think it just requires some kind of intellectual humility and recognizing that, hey, I could be wrong about this, but I know a reasonable amount about this area and it's probably like this. And I'm pretty happy to be able to help someone with the knowledge that I have and with the opinion that I have, but I'm open to changing my mind in the future. So, I think that the problem is that if you let imposter syndrome go too far, then you end up kind of undermining your self-confidence and your ability to actually help people. Because like I said, maybe you think you can't do the job and so you hold back. But on the other hand, you also don't want to get too overconfident. And sometimes that imposter syndrome, if you recognize that you're getting it every now and then, that's a good thing because it is showing that you actually recognize that your abilities are not, maxed out in every area as well. What sometimes happens as well is that sometimes the imposter syndrome is so strong in a particular area that you kind of just go, I'm going to ignore that completely. And it happens quite a lot with like things like business skills and stuff for trainers. They go, oh, marketing and sales, I didn't sign up to do that. I'm not good at it. Like, I can't do that. Like, forget it. So they just ignore it to their own detriment as well. And so I think that's where this like lack of confidence is something that definitely hurts you a little bit. So if it holds you back from like diving in and learning a bit more about something because you're scared about it, then that's probably not a good thing either.
Yeah, and a couple of things. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but a couple of times you said there, holding back, it might make trainers scared of, saying an opinion or something like that. Because do you think that that's because people don't want to be shot at. They don't want to be seen as maybe an expert because I know we said before about there can be some people that feel as though they want to be a specialist in that area. Like I'm going to be the nutrition guy or the bodybuilding guy or whatever, which is really good. And a lot of coaches go towards that. Speak about that with the people who people that have done internships. Find an area that you're interested in because coach as many people as you like, and then after a while, you might end up refining and be like, do you know what, I really like boxing, so I'm going to be the boxing guy. Do you think that sometimes people are or coaches are afraid to have an opinion because they're frightened they'll get shot at, or somebody else in that area might be like, oh well, actually you've got this wrong, as opposed to the con of it or the pro of it even is, oh well, actually they've said an opinion on this, and then like what you said there, they're then willing to change about it. A prime example that I always use is Mike Boyle. He's usually the main guy to say yes, I'll do this, but he's quite open to admit, well, actually, I was maybe wrong about that, or
Yep.
I've changed my opinion, or this has come out and people have shown that this is actually work. Tying into that humility side of things that you touched on.
Yeah, mate, for sure. The problem is, I think it's a little bit magnified by stuff like social media because I've really experienced this issue where you're almost afraid to post something sometimes because you know that that's going to go out to a bunch of strangers who might say unkind things about you or say you're wrong, or they might send it to someone who's more of an expert than you in the field and they might disagree with you, which again doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. It might just be a different context, or it might be a learning opportunity for you, or you might get it mostly right, whatever it is. But I think the point is that putting yourself out there sometimes can be really, really scary. And you think, like, maybe I'm not good enough to post an opinion on this because some random might take a pot shot at me or whatever on the internet. And I've found that as my audience has grown, that's been kind of scary for me because now it's some of my posts like literally reach millions of accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what if I've gotten something wrong here? Like there's millions of eyes on this that could call me out on it. So you kind of got to get over that because ultimately you're not going to be right every time. And I think as long as you're sort of reasonable and you're honest about the fact that like you have done a bit of research or something on a particular topic, then it's perfectly reasonable to have an opinion on it, to have a professional opinion on it. And again, you can learn and you can change it. It's not really a big deal. Um, and again, like you don't need to be an absolute expert in something to help somebody with an issue. You can have a little bit of knowledge and you can understand where your limits are and you can still help someone with it, even if you aren't like the boxing guy or whatever. you still might be able to help someone a little bit. So I think there is that element of it. And, it's not necessarily a bad thing all the time, because ultimately I think every coach kind of comes to this realization at some point that you've got people's health and well-being in your hands.
Mm.
And I sort of, this like just dawned on me once, because I started personal training when I was 18 years old, and I had these people coming to me, and when I was like maybe 18, 19, I was like, oh geez, actually, like, I could injure this person. I could affect their health for the rest of their life. I'm just some 19-year-old kid, But ultimately, I was still able to help people, even if I was inexperienced, and even if I didn't know absolutely everything at that time. And there's a lot of things that I would have changed that I, now with 15, 16 years of experience. But, nonetheless, still had an overall positive impact on those people in general. So, yeah, mate, it's definitely scary putting yourself out there and having an opinion on something. Again, like, I don't think we should be just doing hot takes all the time. But at the same time, I think you got to back yourself. And if what you're saying is reasonable and someone kind of takes a shot at you for it, it's like, it's their problem, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's it, because just touching on the social media side of things, it's not always, it's kind of that thing of filtering the information, because literally anybody could comment and say, you could put anything out on Instagram, for example, and no one's going to say, oh, well, no, actually, like, no one's going to look back through and look at it. Whereas actually sometimes people will look back and through it and send, oh, well, actually, there's this study about this. I remember once I had, uh, it was somebody commented on a post, and they mentioned a study. Awesome. Studies are brilliant, science, you use all that. But actually the participants were basically obese females of a certain age, and relative to that population, it was correct. However, you can't always, my point was, you can't always apply that to everybody. So even though that study was like, yeah, this and this will happen, that makes sense, it's a case of, you can't then just apply that to everything, because some things can be misinterpreted. I know for me, like, I'm not sure whether you've signed up to it, but what I find really helpful is the mass, so the monthly
Yeah, it's
application.
awesome,
Yeah,
mate.
I
Love that.
think they basically turn, what I like is that they turn the studies into blogs, like, just that, which I find really helpful, because I mean, I'll be honest, I've not read a full journal since I was at uni, so, and I
It's
found it hard
rough.
reading
Yeah.
it then.
Yeah. It's not easy.
Yeah, so it's that thing of, it's just a case of putting it out there, because it's that rock and a hard place of, you need to maybe use social media to have an audience, but then again, it's kind of that thing of, if you don't use it, you're only going to be able to reach word of mouth in terms of the people that you're training in person. So there's a couple of swings and roundabouts with that, but one thing on that I wanted to touch on, just to hear your thoughts, and if this has come up with the trainers that you've worked with as well. There's a point where, and I know a couple of coaches where, in like my local area, have started sort of collaborating with physios or anything like that, or other coaches in a different specialist area, just to kind of have somebody to refer to, or just ask questions. Is that, and especially with the number of podcasts and information that's out there, have you found that a lot more coaches are wanting to collaborate a little bit more and build that network, as opposed to just clamming up and thinking, right, okay, I'm going to try and do everything myself? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I have seen that. I think the people who recognize that is actually, you can turn that into a strength, those are the people who are starting to do that a lot more, because there is a fear that, oh, if I start referring clients, like, I'm giving away business or something like that, or I'm showing that actually that I don't know as much as, I want people to think I know. But really, when you do that sort of stuff, I think people warm to you so much and they appreciate that so much, like clients do, that it actually gets fed back to you in spades, because they appreciate it so much, right? So it's a bit of a tough one sometimes to kind of go, well, I don't know something about this, you need to go see somebody else, or this is not my area of expertise, I only train like people for bodybuilding or something like that. It can be a bit hard to turn away business, or to admit that you don't know something, or you're not the best at something, but people appreciate it so much. And then the thing is if you're referring to a network, it's only going to benefit everybody. So what's happening is you're benefiting somebody else's business. Your client or potential lead is benefiting because they're seeing the right person. And you actually end up benefiting because anybody who comes to that person is now going to get referred back to you, or any friend of this client or lead that you've helped. They're going to be like, man, Steve is such a great guy. Like, he sent me to the exact person I needed. So now I have a friend, and turns out Steve is the exact person that's a perfect fit for them. So I'm going to refer them. And so it actually ends up benefiting absolutely everybody in the situation. It's a win-win-win. But it is really difficult. Like, I've been a little bit in the past, at the start of my career, a little bit greedy of like, I'll take on any client, I'll do anything I can. If I don't know something, like, I'll just lie to their face and be like, yeah, I can help you with that. And then go home and spend the next, like, the weekend just locked in my room trying to research it. Which, I suppose you learn a little bit that way, but it's probably not the best thing to do. So, you got to kind of get over that fear a little bit. And that is like a massive mark of imposter syndrome sometimes, when you kind of feel like you have to be greedy because you don't know enough, if that makes sense. It's kind of a weird inverse thing that happens. But it's a good mark when you can kind of embrace it, and then you can refer out. Obviously, it just benefits everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, speaking from my own experience, I think you only get that as you, I don't know, maybe get a little bit older and a little bit more experience as well to realize that, look, it's much better. So yesterday, for example, we had a member sign up, and she's actually been working with a physio. She had a really bad lower back injury. Wanted to basically got to a point where she felt like she could come back to the gym, which is awesome. She used to do a lot of strength training before. Wants to get back to that. So just had a phone call with her physio, and actually it was quite probably just quite nice. The physio was quite surprised that as a PT rang him, actually had an okayish understanding of the biomechanics, anatomy of the spine and what's going to help with it. And then it's actually turned out into, come down to the gym, have a look round. Like, is there anything that you doing that you would suggest? And I think it's, when it pays off, I think it's a good thing to happen, because then all of a sudden, like what you said there, if somebody else is wanting to get back into the gym, that was a nice chat. And I'm always of the mind of, it'll either fall into two categories: either come for a coffee or come for a beer. He wanted to come in the middle of the day, so it's going to be it could be a beer as well. I don't know, depending on time. But come for a coffee and work from that, because he's worked with her for, I think it was a year. I think they've dropped down to maybe just seeing her seeing him just once a month. But he's going to have loads of information, loads of data on that. And a little bit like what you said, I could have gone and learnt about the injury and asked her loads of questions. Whereas I don't know what your thoughts are, but to make your life as a PT easier, sometimes it's easier just to go right to the source and just ask and be like, look, I don't want to step on your toes. I just want to help. Because ultimately, you're only going to look more like a professional to them by going straight to the source. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Mate, for sure. Like, the thing is, the physio can't do what you do as a strength coach, right? So ultimately, if you each play your roles, then you get to do what you're really good at and make the most of that and do the best for the client and get a great result for everybody. And you can happily just leave the physioing to him. He can happily leave the strength training to you, and it's all sweet. We're all playing our roles here and doing a good job. You don't have to be an expert at absolutely everything. And the fact is, you can't be an absolute expert at everything. So it's a really good situation if you can get that sorted. And I'm sure, the first thing that's going to come to this physio's mind, if he needs to refer someone on to a gym, guess where he's going to go, So it's a good thing.
Touch wood, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully you did an all right job, eh?
Yeah. But with that as well, again, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but you mentioned there, doing a good job, looking after the client. And I always liken it to sort of, a big corporation or anything like that. There's a HR department, there's a whatever department there is. And I think sometimes there's a thought process that there is a lack of professionalism within the coaching or fitness industry, if you like. Do you think that, with this, more people trying to collaborate, more people trying to, better themselves in terms of that business and marketing and trying to put things out there that isn't just a case of eat chicken and lettuce and you're going to lose weight really, really quickly? Do you think that, you know, things are becoming a little bit more professional, or coaches are wanting to try and have a certain level of professionalism by reaching out and having mentors and coaches themselves and those sorts of things?
Well, that's what I've seen. I mean, I've always found that I'm acutely aware that I might be in a little bit of an echo chamber and a little, area of the fitness industry that probably isn't representative of the entire fitness industry. But certainly in my little circle, it seems like there are a lot of coaches who are really open to doing more education, to mentoring with people, to brushing up on areas that they think they're a little bit weak at that could make them better coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly found over my career, at least, it went from being guys like me who were just like, yeah, I'm okay at sport, but not good enough to be a professional, and I like training, so I'm going to be a coach, or I'm going to be a personal trainer. It's definitely moved on to people being like, no, I'm going to pursue a degree, and then like with an exercise science degree, I'm going to be a personal trainer, which is like kind of almost overkill sometimes, right? Like you're doing a year of placement and you're learning all this biomechanics and stuff that you probably don't need to coach a beginner, to be perfectly honest. But you're starting to see people taking it much more seriously as a proper career and taking their education much more seriously, which is great to see. So I think it is moving that way. Coaches trying to be a little bit more professional and treating it as a career, which is a great thing, because if you think about any other career, whether you go into a trade or whether you go to uni and then move on to like some kind of corporate job or something, there's this whole path that you take throughout your career. You do a lot of education, whether it's like a trade school, or then you do like apprenticeships, and then you move up a level. And it's the same. Like if you're a lawyer, sorry, like you're going to start at the bottom and you're going to be at the office, like doing all of the grunt work for 12 hours a day. And you slowly move up, and maybe you get an opportunity to do an MBA, or maybe you get an opportunity to specialize in your trade or whatever. And I've always wondered from the start of my career, I wondered like, why don't personal trainers do that? Because when I first started, I was 18 on the gym floor, and I saw 45, 50-year-old trainers that were doing the exact same thing that I was doing with the exact same knowledge that I had. So it's really great to see people actually treating it like, hey, I can progress throughout my career, and I can actually end up being some kind of an expert in some area and level up that way. So it's really good. And, something that I am seeing a lot more of as well is an approach that I think is a lot better is a client-centered approach, by which I mean we're kind of a team, like we're collaborating. The client has information or something on their end that we don't have. They have their personal experience. They have their context and their opinions on things that they can bring to the table, their training history, etc. And we have our experience and knowledge as a coach. And I think if we view it as like we're both bringing something to the table and we're collaborating on the best way to move forward, then it's a much, much, much better situation than, I'm the chief, I'm the boss, just do what I tell you because I know best. And I'm starting to see there's a big shift towards that style of coaching, at least in I think it's probably small, but it's in the area that I'm seeing. And a lot of the coaches that are coming to me are of that mindset. And it's really cool to see, because I think it's far more effective, and it actually takes the pressure off you as a coach a little bit to be the absolute expert in everything. And sometimes it does help alleviate that imposter syndrome that you get sometimes, because you don't have to know everything. You can say to the client, listen, I don't really know, but like I'm here as just this collaborative voice to kind of help you move forward. So maybe we need to learn about this thing together, or maybe we need to find someone who knows something about this together, or there are other ways I can support you as well. So it's a good way to help overcome that and not feel like you have to know everything about everything.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's well, it's good to see that you've seen that as well, because I've definitely seen a little bit of a shift kind of in
Nice.
that direction, which is cool compared to yeah, when I very first started, you kind of look and see things and think, should you be doing that? Is
Yeah.
that all
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But oh no, cool. And I think kind of along the same lines of when you've said there about, I know we touched on, referring out, or, trying to be like, look, if I don't know something that, I always use the example of that's why I set up the podcast and have kind of stuck with it, because at first I literally just used to use my phone and people would ask me questions and I thought it would be cool to say, this is episode 1, this is this question. Then it got to a point where I didn't feel confident enough, or didn't feel as though the answers that I would give would answer the question appropriately. Go out and reach out to people, such as yourself, who will be able to offer, a little bit more knowledge around that subject. And then, probably on a selfish note, it's helped me actually develop as a better coach as well. But with that, it's kind of the basics get spoken about. As a coach, everyone always says, look, you need to do the basics. But sometimes, even though the basics can get people quite a long way, as a coach, sometimes they get skipped out. And when you mentioned there, you can go do degrees, go do courses, all real, maybe complex things, but ultimately the person in front of you, they're not sleeping. So it doesn't matter what we give them in terms of nutrition or training. If they're not sleeping, they're not going to engage in that. And I think the question there is, how can coaches make people do the basics better, as opposed to trying to think about the next layer above, which is maybe just some things, probably just a bit too complex. Just try to do the simple things better rather than the more trying to get people to do the complicated things. I hope I've kind of said that right.
Yeah, I totally get you. And you'd be surprised how often that is the thing that I actually revert back to with coaches themselves. Like a lot of us, I mean, we know what that low-hanging fruit is. It's like, I don't get to bed on time because I only get a couple of hours a day after taking care of my daughter, and I tend to just put off sleep till a little bit too late, So it's what I mentioned before. It's about collaborating. It's about meeting them where they're at. It's not really good enough as a coach to say you've got to get to bed on time. You've got to help them find a strategy that's going to work for them in their context and in their life. So it's about asking those questions. Well, why aren't you able to get to bed on time? How can I help you with that? That's coaching. Coaching is not saying here are your macros, hit them or else. It's about trying to meet them where they're at and make small improvements. And the thing is, as a coach, you have so many tools available to you. Like if you wanted someone to help them lose body fat, there's 1,000,001 ways to set up a diet that could work. And there's only going to be a handful of those that are like truly appropriate for the person at that time in their life. So you need to try and figure out, where do I apply it and how do I apply it for this person? Sometimes I'm doing stuff that is quote unquote suboptimal with people because that's what's going to work for them. Not, that's what's going to work for them right now. So, I think that's where it comes in, and those basic things obviously have a fairly big return on investment. So it's just about finding ways with that person of getting it to work for them. Now, one thing that I like to do, which really helps that decision-making process and helps people really believe in what they're trying to do, is part of my onboarding process is what I call a foundation week. And what I'm doing there is taking them through some videos and some exercises about how habits form, about behavior change, and most importantly, about identifying their intrinsic values. And I think this is like a really underrated exercise. So a value is essentially like a way that you want to live your life. Okay. So for example, one of my values is, I just call it like challenge, like seek challenge. I think that's really important for me. You can actually search like intrinsic values list and it'll give you some examples, but really you can just kind of make it up if you want to as well. And what I would recommend doing is identifying the top sort of 3 or 4. You're probably going to have like, I don't know, maybe 10 or something of things that are really important to you. It might be like family, spirituality, physical health, learning, whatever, travel. And so I would identify the top sort of 3 or 4 so that you have an idea of like what your priority is right now at this time in your life. And then once you've identified those, you can figure out ways of expressing those values in the actions that you take. Okay. So instead of it being like, well, you need to get to bed on time so that you can like have a normal appetite the next day so that you can lose body fat, someone might identify their value, one of their values, as something like discipline, or it might be something like, health, like just being healthy is really important to me. And so if you can sort of take that behavior through the lens of their value, then they're much more likely to engage in it and do it. And it actually gives you options of like, how can we express this value through the behaviors that we're trying to instill with training and nutrition and lifestyle stuff. And then it makes the decision-making process way easier. So now instead of like the 1,000 ways of doing their nutrition, there's probably going to be like several hundred of them that don't align with their values whatsoever. And so you can just trash them and be like, sweet, well, what's the one that's going to give us the most payoff because it's going to be consistent with your values? And then they're much more likely to do it because they see how it relates to their ideal version of themselves. So for me, that has been the most powerful tool in consistently getting people to do some of the basic stuff well and do it consistently.
Is that the thing where, because again, with the basics, it is simple things that people do every single day. It isn't like everyone sleeps, everyone eats, and train. They're kind of like the biggest ones. And obviously you can talk about stress management and those sorts of things, but sometimes they take a little bit longer depending on if you've had a newborn baby or whatever it else. There's only going to be certain things that you're going to be able to have that control over. And do you think it's interesting saying there about, because I think there is I got sent a values questionnaire, and it actually once you ticked everything, it said like, do you agree with this? Does this match what you think? Yes or no? And then it came up and it basically filtered out your top three basically. Because things the basics are done every single day. Is that where people kind of I can't think of the word, just maybe take them for granted? Just think that even though they might not be getting to bed on time, in their head, they're still thinking, well, I'm still going to bed. I am actually sleeping, but it's kind of making them realize that, well, look, you're only actually getting 4 hours of sleep. Like that isn't going to be good. And then, like what you mentioned there, relating it to their values, do you think it is a case of just taking it for granted? Like, the food, it's like, well, I'm still eating. Yeah, but we're eating Twixes all day. That's not going to be.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it almost feels like it's too basic, in their heads or something like that. And it does sometimes take identifying your values to recognize what those behaviors are actually doing. Like, what are you actually expressing? What version of yourself are you working towards by expressing these behaviors? So sometimes it's just a reframe. It's like, to give you an example. So I just mentioned that one of my values is to challenge myself. And being able to have that mindset when I was having low points with the baby was something that really got me through that, as opposed to getting overly frustrated and being like, this sucks and whatever. It really enabled me to just kind of embrace it and roll with it and be like, you know what, I have to do this and I have to do it well because I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to grow, and this is it. And it's amazing how much just that shift helps. It was the same with my work. Because I run my own business and it's going quite well, I would work 60 or 70 hour weeks. I would work every single day. And what I slowly realized was that actually the challenge in this for me is not working hard. The challenge for me is working less, giving myself less time to do the work and to actually take the time to spend it with my wife, to chill out a bit, to relax, to let it go. And so it seems kind of counterintuitive sometimes, but once I realized that, then it's like, again, the feeling when you're actually acting in alignment with your values is like a light bulb goes off. It really, really makes a big difference. And so suddenly I think that those basic things can seem more valuable or more tangible to people, and they really actually care about doing them. It's not just a case of like, like I want to look great, but I kind of don't want to get to bed on time, or I kind of prefer eating chocolates instead. If you've really hit their value, then I think it's not a case of like, well, I don't want to have a big belly, but at the same time, I couldn't be bothered tracking my macros. It just completely shifts things. So that's why I say it's so important, because suddenly it's like all of your behaviors can just be put in a light of like, is this aligning with my values or is it not? Cool. Well, now I know what I need to do and it makes sense to me.
definitely. And I think sometimes on that, I've had a couple of conversations about this with clients in terms of how their values, sometimes their values relate to their friends or their family or their wives or their husbands or anything like that. And actually it's a case of um sometimes putting those values or looking at those values, putting yourself first in terms of I do need to challenge myself. I do need to work less. I do need to get to bed earlier. So we've got more energy, got more time to actually be able to enjoy those things because we don't we don't track our macros for the love of tracking macros, if that
Exactly.
kind of makes sense. You kind of do all these things so that you either feel confident so you can wear the clothes that you want to wear. Where are you going to wear the clothes that you want to wear when you're out with your friends or your family or doing whatever? The whole point is that we're doing it for not to be really cheesy, but for life. It's
Yeah.
similar to um I have this conversation about obviously having competing in powerlifting, and the strength sport side of things. Yes, numbers are cool. At one point I started picking once you get past a certain weight in kilos, I just started picking weights that sounded cool in pounds because it's like, well, that sounds a lot better than the other one. Ultimately, no one's really bothered. It doesn't really no one really cares. It's just a case of it makes me feel good and confident. And even though I've taken a step away from powerlifting, and I'm not I'm not a million miles away from those numbers, but I still feel good. I still feel strong because my values or what's important to me is keeping that consistency of training because I know that it makes me feel good if I'm training. It then means that I'm going to be more organized with my week. If I'm more organized with my week, I know I can, and it's a domino effect, like what you mentioned there about, when we're building habits, it's got to be able to be able to build up from there. So yeah, and I thought that was quite interesting in terms of a couple of topics touched on there, especially about that being better at the basics. But I know I asked this question at the end of the first episode, but I always like to ask this question for everyone listening who from all the topics that we've chatted about today. What would be your take home points, Luke, or words of wisdom?
Yeah, well, to recap it is that it's really really normal to feel imposter syndrome and to feel like you don't know what you're doing at something, especially if you're a coach and you got someone's health in your hands. But it's kind of a healthy thing to have as well. And I would just encourage people to sort of have some intellectual humility, but also to be sort of confident enough to put themselves out there, to have an opinion. And I think it helps a lot if you go through and do that values exercise. I honestly believe that that is like absolutely key for everybody to go through and do. So definitely, if you just Google something like, identify intrinsic values or something like that, you'll be able to find it's a really simple thing to do. And then you can sort of act from that. And it makes such a big difference, honestly. But, really normal to feel like you have to know everything and you don't. Take it from me, who's now, I think this is now my 16th year or something in the industry. So yeah, really, really normal to feel that. But, as you go through, you kind of figure all of that stuff out. And I think that having that collaborative approach is probably where a lot of coaches start to arrive the more experience they've had. So if you are maybe a coach who's earlier in your career, having that switch in mindset of like, this is collaborative, this is client led, is something that I wish I'd done a little bit earlier in my career. And it makes a really big difference to my job satisfaction and to the results we get as well. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Luke. Really enjoyed the first episode. I know that was really well received. Was really glad to have you back on and enjoy catching up with you today. If anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, see the content that you put out there, or even work with yourself, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, my website is luketulloch.com or my Instagram, and that's got like all the info and stuff in my bio as well. So go there. You can feel free to message me or whatever as well. That's all cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.